I am the Minister of Information and Communications for North Vietnam. People of the world, North Vietnam wants to call your attention to what is happening on our soil in Asia. Once again, the power-hungry United States has shoved its nose into our internal affairs and have engaged in a proxy war as a desperate attempt to spread its imperial sphere of influence where it is not wanted. Their presence has been extremely destructive. Hundreds of innocent children, mothers, fathers, and elderly are consistently being massacred by the United States soldiers who are fighting a war with no cause. North Vietnam seeks to rewrite their history and finally and rightfully become a sovereign nation. Just one example of the horrendous actions of the United States is the My Lai massacre. At General Calley's command, the massacre had begun, with the general himself shooting many men, women, and children who did not understand what was going on. Mothers who were shielding their children were shot, and when their children tried to run away, they were too slaughtered. Huts were set on fire, and anyone inside who tried to escape was gunned down. In addition to killing unarmed men, women, and children, the soldiers slaughtered countless livestock, raped countless women, and burned everything to the ground. U.S. soldiers themselves reported their generals dragging dozens of young children into a ditch before executing them with a machine gun. The Americans believe that they are liberating our people, but the only thing that they have done is taken innocent lives and continue to do so. North Vietnam will not back down, and we will continue to fight for our cause, an independent and unified Vietnam. The world has to acknowledge the inhumane war crimes that the United States have engaged in. North Vietnam is sick of the atrocities that plague our suffering people and wish for peace at last. We hope that the world can, at this time, sympathize with our current situation and help the U.S. realize that they do not belong on our soil. I will not be taking any further questions. Thank you.
Nixon is a law and order candidate who will bring peace, prosperity, and a bright future to America after the failure of the Democrats and LBJ. He will work closely with the American people and to make the silent majority heard once more. Nixon, if elected, will bring law and order, economic peace and prosperity, and a general well-being to America. And he will make the silent majority heard once again. I will be taking 2 questions.
What are President Nixon's policies in regards to foreign affairs, and is also in regards to foreign affairs and relationships with other countries such as China and Russia?
For foreign affairs, we want to rein back foreign aid to potentially hostile nations against America. We want to continue with the Administrative Export Control Act. We want to expand the Foreign Service, and we want to continue to work on the 1965 Immigration Act. We want to tighten passport control, and we want to make sure that the dollar is strengthened and is again competitive in the United States and abroad. We want freer trade, and we want tax reforms to make this free trade happen. And we want to continue to protect Latin and South America from the threat of communism, in accordance with the Monroe Doctrine. And we want stable peace in the Middle East, and we will work towards all of these goals with a rigor.
Does Nixon have a plan for U.S. involvement in Vietnam?
Nixon will use a light touch in Vietnam. We have a couple plans floating around, but the most important thing is that we are going to reduce the troops in Vietnam, and we want to train the South Vietnamese to take over the war. We will continue to support and stop the threat of communists worldwide, but it is time that the United States gives the war back over to the South Vietnamese, and they are allowed to fight for their freedom and their right for a free and stable democracy. Thank you.
Today, I, the Minister of Post, Telegraph, and Telephones, will be representing France. In recent events, the Sorbonne students, along with construction and steel unions, have revolted, demanding representation, better wages, and better hours. Economically, France is taking cuts from certain government organizations and raising income taxes to send our support to these unions. Additionally, France will be giving students a platform on which to speak their mind. This platform is a place on the school board. This being said, violence will not be tolerated, and those who demonstrate violence will not be allowed to participate in this race. In the news of recent violence, in an effort to protect our citizens, 12 new officers are being trained in each department within the borders of Paris. This is a way to keep the safety of the people at utmost importance. France does not wish to entertain any questions today.
Good evening, everyone. I am the press secretary of the USSR. Recently, the Soviet Union has been discussing how best to help the North Vietnamese against the rebellious South and the imperialist United States. Currently, we plan to give humanitarian aid to the North Vietnamese as requested by the Vietnamese cabinet in the form of food, water, and medical supplies. That is all I currently have. I have time to take 2 questions if there are any. Okay, good night.
Good evening. I'm the press secretary for the United States. Today, the United States has focused their attentions on Vietnam and the recent events at home. First, I'd like to focus on Vietnam. The Johnson administration is committed to de-escalation of Vietnam. We would like to focus more on the defensive instead of the offensive. So we will be ending our bombing campaign of North Vietnam and focusing on bringing our boys home. Additionally, in order to make South Vietnam an image of democracy for all the rest of the world to see, we're going to be focusing on humanitarian aid to South Vietnam. Ultimately, we hope to support and stabilize South Vietnam and honor the lives of our American troops. Additionally, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., we are deeply saddened. He was a great leader and an image of equality for many. He will be greatly missed. After his sad death, we must remain hopeful. In order to do this, the Johnson administration is planning a funeral to honor his life and is also looking to pass the Fair Housing Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1968 to honor his legacy and dedication to civil rights. Furthermore, in order to honor his image or beliefs in peace, we are looking to end and de-escalate the Vietnam War. After the death of MLK, there have been urban riots that we wish to address. In order to do so, we have planned to bolster the local police force with the National Guard, which will not be used violently, but only to uphold the protesters' right to protest in a constructive and constitutional way. Because ultimately, the Johnson administration shares their anguish and shares their belief in civil rights. We also hope to open bilateral talks with these protesters in order to pursue our common goal of civil rights. Ultimately, when we do this, we hope to make Chicago and all American cities safe. Especially focusing on Chicago, we would like to make Chicago safe for the DNC as we nominate the next American president. Thank you. I will now take questions.
So if the Johnson administration is for the de-escalation of the Vietnam War, why did President Johnson recently veto the Vietnam De-Escalation Act of 1968 after it won the Senate vote?
Right. So Johnson is in favor of de-escalation. And because of the recent events that have occurred, there have been some pieces in that De-Escalation Act that he would like to change. But ultimately, the total goal in it and the efforts of de-escalation is a view he still shares. There are just some things that we'd like to amend and modify before we rewrite that act again, and then we ultimately look past it.
So I know now and then before in the question session, you spoke about LBJ and how he cares deeply about civil rights, and he's worked on the Civil Rights Act and tried to honor MLK. But I have a source, an anonymous source, and it tells me that LBJ said that the city of Chicago will be put on lockdown due to, and this is a quote, the African American community to act up to true American standards, and then that Chicago is run rampant with crime due to their high African American population. So I'm just wondering if LBJ is trying to work towards unity and a common goal, how is that possible when LBJ clearly does not see the African American population as equal to his own?
Right. I'm not aware of any information of that nature, and because you cannot reveal your source, I cannot tell you the validity of it. I can tell you that in my time in the cabinet, the objective that we have decided with the course of action that we want to take is to open up those bilateral peace talks, because LBJ does stand by his commitment to civil rights. You know, we want to open up a channel where we can talk to these protesters and discover common ground in ways that we can pass the policies that they want, and in a way that we are able to do so, and to honor MLK's legacy. You know, the only reason that we're sending the police force and bolstering up the National Guard is just to ensure that these protesters protest peacefully, and that the cities that they're doing so, you know, aren't destroyed with fire. You know, we want to uphold order in America, but we also want to make sure that people are able to exercise their right to free speech and continue their dedication to civil rights.
Thank you. The Chinese cabinet has accomplished much in the past couple of days. First, it's worked very hard to help ensure that everyone, even those of lower class, are able to succeed in our country. And we've done this by helping improve factories, improve working conditions, and also to improve farms as well as productivity. And through all of these methods, we've been able to ensure that each citizen has a good standard of living and is doing better than they were prior to Mao's administration. Nonetheless, all of us have seen a major issue that is jeopardizing this great prosperity, and that issue is the Russian aggression against the Chinese border, specifically in Manchuria. The Russians have amassed a great portion of their troops onto our northern border in an attempt to try to threaten the Chinese way of life. But these Russians are not understanding that we will defend our way of life and our moral system. And furthermore, we do not intend on allowing ourselves to be subjugated by an ideology under the Russians that is not helping anyone, and an ideology that has hurt much of Eastern Europe and could very much hurt much of Asia. And for that reason, we hope to extend a helping hand out to other Asian nations that are facing similar Russian subjugation as well as aggression. At this time, I will take up to 2 questions.
You stated that each citizen is doing better now that Mao Zedong is in charge. However, during the Cultural Revolution, many intellectuals were prosecuted and even killed simply because they were intelligent, and Mao Zedong's government saw that as a threat. So how can you justify each citizen being happy if intellectuals are being prosecuted by Zedong's government?
Well, I think if you really look at our policies and what we've tried to do with intellectuals, you'll find not prosecution, but a careful use of these intellectuals in order to help ensure that our process and our current state of being can be the best it can possibly be. So we've used these technocrats for sure. And because we're using these technocrats in order to help the population and to help our factory output, it's quite clear that we're not going to be going after these intellectuals because they're the very people we're relying on in industries like factories.
So the statement that the Russians have moved troops up to your borders, will you be retaliating by sending any troops to your borders as well, or will you just stay calm? And
We have no intention of retaliating. All of our troops are under a strict order to ensure that some peace can remain in sight. And so for that reason, we have ordered our troops not to attack the Russians. But we feel the need to explain that what the Russians have done is completely unprovoked. And therefore, we have taken some measures as far as our border security, but they are all in the efforts of merely preserving our national sovereignty. And they are not an attempt to start a useless war with the Russians. All right. That's all I have time for.